Seeking education for yourself is the search for the good life. The good man's first duty is to be intelligent. Good intentions alone do not enable a man to judge wisely or behave well. The American writer Everett Dean Martin asserted the following: moral behavior is not only social, it is also intelligent behavior. An act has moral significance when the performance shows insight into the situation. An action done under compulsion or without understanding has no moral value. A machine can behave very correctly, but it is not a moral being. An act has moral meaning to just the extent that its author grasps the implications of the situation in which he must act, and is guided by consideration of the results. An act is judged not merely by the intention, as moralists would have it, but by its results. It is the aim of education to develop the insight and foresight and breadth of vision which make it possible for the individual to take responsibility for the results of his behavior. The greater the intelligence, the more nearly does the consideration of an act approach the estimate of the total result. Thus, the aims of education and morals are the same, the good life, insofar as it may be attained by intelligent choice and behavior. Throughout history, there has been a conscious effort to reunite truth and goodness. But what was sought after were just ideas, mere abstractions about the true and the good. However, it is not as logical abstractions that the true and good are reunited, but in the recognition that the wise act is the good deed. In this sense, wisdom is virtue, and virtue is wisdom. It is occasionally true that educated people are sometimes devious, and are only made increasingly evil by their knowledge, using it wrongly instead of rightly. Such people are not wise, but merely clever and cunning. However, good conduct is not merely a matter of reasoning and calculating either. There is no denying that things such as desire, instinct, and purpose are involved, but it is generally recognized that education and morals alike have something to do with training, channeling, or controlling the primitive aspects of human nature. Intelligence is not mere intellect or brain power. There is a holistic component, in that the wholly intelligent man directs and carries himself wisely in his environment. From one time or place to another, fashions in behavior patterns change. These fashions seem to be important at the time that they hold sway, and as such, people confuse what is fashionable or popular with what is moral. Efforts are made by progressive liberal-minded reformists to introduce cutting-edge innovations and constantly evolving social trends. In modern basic terms, this is the phenomenon of the current thing, and it functions in much the same way as when a fashion designer introduces a new or rehashed line of clothing for the next season, which will predictably flow in popularity like the wind. Some may claim to be on the verge of ushering in a new revolutionary morality, but morality is neither new nor old. Rules of conduct which can be made into mere matters of fashionable style are typically applicable to behavior, action, and causes, the results of which are largely unimportant, which is why such rules are so malleable and forgettable, coming and going like trends. Such rules have very little real moral value. Instead of becoming solidified and undeniably timeless, such questionable rules constitute the folkways or customs which prevail, but only for a given time. Because these malleable customs are actually built on weak foundations, conformity is required by the herd to maintain the illusion that the customs are in any way important. And it is only through conformity that the customs are even adhered to and observed as a requirement at all. The opposite custom could one day become the rule, just as easily or as quickly. It is with respect to such matters that self-education has the effect of liberating the individual and improving morals. It breaks the hold of the taboo and breaks the trance-like stupor, so that one may now open their eyes freely and look at the world with different perspective. It becomes possible to discriminate between what is important and unimportant, and it leads to the formation of principles based upon consideration of the results of one's behavior, leading to a greater sense of accountability. Ultimately, the differences in conduct that count most are those between stupid deeds and well-considered deeds. Long ago, Aristotle showed us that each of our virtues, unless intelligently exercised in moderation, tends towards the extreme and becomes a vice. A virtue is what it does, not what it feels like to its possessor. That is to say, a virtue is objective and a priori, not subjective. Take into account the essential notion of loyalty. There can be no social stability or cohesion without loyalty, but at the extreme, there is probably no more serious or dangerous menace than unintelligent, blind loyalty. One of the best quotes to come from Martin is the following: "The man whose conduct is regulated by his own insight and by principles which are relevant to the situation at hand is a morally responsible being." And to the degree that a man assumes responsibility for his conduct, he reveals the quality of his education. However, it is obvious that every society, regardless of the religion or ideology it adheres to, must develop its moral codes as men learn to live together. In a community, everyone is part of the environment of everyone else, and each must adjust himself to such a human environment. Adjustment is impossible if there's no order in the environment. Hence, from the beginning, certain habits and customs have existed, which make it possible for men to predict to some extent what their neighbors will do. These habits and customs are the primitive morals, for which it is the task of wisdom to inquire into and reevaluate to gradually improve or discard, and intelligently consider substituting suitable means and ends. When morals are presented in the form of divine commandments or ideological rules, morality is mere obedience. It consists in keeping the commandments, not acting in accordance to the demands of a situation. This passage can be clearly explained by analysing the well-known quote from the English novelist George Orwell: "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." If current times tell us anything, it is that moral obedience to divine or state-issued commandments and ideological rules is widely and blindly accepted by the masses as the right thing to do, and thus the moral thing to do, with no further justification required. But hidden behind the thin veil of this supposed morality is often a dangerous lust for power and control. Thus, if acting intelligently in accordance with the demands of a situation is the true meaning of morality, and morality and truth are meant to be aligned, then informed questioning or rejection of ridiculous and nonsensical commandments in pursuit of truth is considered dangerously revolutionary, even if the situation calls for such action. Yet, if I act in strict obedience to a command issued by a religion or the state, the results of my deed are no longer my concern, and I can absolve myself. The responsibility for the result of my actions can be placed upon the deity or the state. Don't blame me, blame my commander, for I was merely following orders. Thus, I can ignore, in fact, should ignore, the lessons of experience and of conduct. The commandment does not require me to have any insight into the situations I act upon. I have no moral responsibility. People whose conduct is guided by such statements have committed many outrageous deeds and have, with good conscience, closed their eyes to the terrible consequences of their behavior. From the standpoint of their education, they are children. They have learned nothing. In regards to moral education, the infantile attitude that originally religion and now the state seeks to preserve in adult life eventually becomes a serious obstacle to an authentic liberal education. There is a tendency to disregard the consequences of one's actions if one seeks, as many modern people do, to make a religion of morality itself. Yet it all depends on what you mean. If in some vague sort of way you try to be good, and if freely maintaining a certain moral earnestness is considered religious enough for you, very well, good for you. But you have not said anything much of substance. What exactly are you basing your worldview off of? Nowadays, few believers would be able to actually explain the origin of their liberal doctrine, let alone defend it in an open debate. And this is a great shame and an indictment on the standards of educational institutions. Most take the worldview for granted as a given, but no ideology is a given, especially if it is not well understood by those who claim to adopt it. The American founding father Thomas Paine said, "To do good is my religion." But did he really add much to his goodwill by claiming it as a religion? It's laughable when you realize he may as well have said, "I desire very much to do good." What a groundbreaking revelation, Mr. Paine. You seek to do good. Wow. As do all right-minded people. Excuse my sarcasm, but the difficulty comes when we try to find out what specifically we mean by doing good, and doing good for whom. For the most part, all that one can do is this: do the thing that in your best judgment is the thing to do under the given circumstances. Do it as well as you can, watch what happens, and learn your lesson from it. In all behavior, he who takes responsibility takes chances. However, another method of escaping moral responsibility is to run with the crowd. The crowd never considers consequences. It is hell-bent upon vindicating its principles at any cost. It is anonymous. In it, the individual may not be held accountable. The crowd is a distinct phenomenon of social psychology. We all have in our natures certain anti-social impulses. The crowd is a sort of pseudo-social environment in which these impulses are not inhibited but are indulged with mutual moral approval. All crowds profess to be devoted to some moral ideal. Their moral idealism is mere self-justification for letting oneself go and losing inhibitions. It is a weapon most useful in partisan conflict. It puts the opponent in the wrong and justifies hostility. Hence, public questions tend to become moral issues, and the attempt to understand the situation gives way to righteous indignation toward anyone who does not approve of the crowd's aims and methods. The crowd strives to hold its members in line. Conformity to its ways and standards is required of all participants, and this becomes an end in itself. One does things because others do them. The crowd man or mass man is shocked by the unconventional because it is unusual. His ideas of right and wrong, which he thinks he possesses by way of an intuition or some given sense of morality which he deems his own original thoughts, are merely those thoughts or ideas which prevail within his group or during his lifetime. the average person's conscience, which seems to them to be an infallible moral guide, and which they hold to be sacred and personal, is actually little more than a reflection of mass opinion. And as men are led astray into mass movements of present-day modern society, they submit more and more of the control of conduct to the new gospel of public conscience or public opinion, and they leave less and less to one's own private judgment. If the crowd thinks it is bad, it is bad. If the crowd thinks it is good, it is good. Individuality is silenced. But in truth, there is no real judgment except for private judgment. Conversely, the public conscience is a creature of emotional instability, characterized by periodic obsessions similar to those of mania. The crowd will remain utterly indifferent to glaring evil as every appeal to it is ignored. Then, all of a sudden, perhaps over a questionable claim, an unconfirmed rumor, or trivial matter, the crowd can reach maximum excitement or blind rage, often leading to full-scale rioting. The crowd fights for an apparent cause, and for a time it is occupied by nothing else. All other realities are thrown out of perspective. The cause is vindicated regardless of consequences. It leads the charge of senseless human wreckage and chaotic bitterness. As soon as the mischief is complete, the cause is swiftly abandoned and forgotten. Order is restored. Men begin to come to their senses, and the public conscience falls asleep yet again until the next episode of frenzied attack. It is precisely for moments like this, which stir the public conscience, that the educated individual will have to be on his guard. He will not be easily bullied into surrendering his private judgment to public opinion. He will not permit the buzzwords of herd morality to scare him away from the consideration of cold, hard facts. Before a man can think for himself, he must have learned to think at all. There is only one sound method of moral education, and it is in teaching people to think. Such is my passion for the topics I discuss, that I've started a Patreon, and now most recently an Odyssey channel, because I know that passion won't fade. So if you enjoyed the video, or find my analysis and insight valuable, please consider liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, or showing some support, and join the discussion of upcoming video essay topics and future book reviews. Your recommendations would be welcome. I will eventually post channel updates regularly on there, and will give you some insight into the next books or ideas that will be used for content. I also plan to eventually create a Rumble and Subscribestar account, so come back to the channel and keep your eyes open for that. Follow the links in the video description below or on the channel About page under links. Thank you very much for the feedback and support you've shown thus far.